Hello! So this video and the videos leading up to Christmas are going to be a little different as I stick my nose to the grindstone and work on gifts for my friends and family. Obviously, the most noticeable change is that I'm using a different camera, and this is because the reference image I'm using is on my phone, which is usually what I use to record. That and the paper I'm working on is rather large, 28 by 38 or 11 by 15, and the boom arm I use for my phone doesn't go back far enough to be able to show the whole thing anyway. Thankfully, I had my old Logitech C920, so that's what I'm using to film this, and likely the others as well. It does mean you see more of my workspace, but also more of myself, so sorry, I think. What's a little frustrating is that this webcam requires more light sources than my phone does, so the videos will appear darker and have more shadows than they normally would. I've tried editing that in post, but there's only so much I can adjust before it starts to look wonky. Hopefully it won't distract too much. I want to get a ring light or something soon so I can have both sides lit and not have this issue, so let me know what you think of this angle and if I should incorporate it into my videos. I mean, that requires more editing, but I suppose I gotta learn at some point, right? I'm not going to try and talk for the whole video. I mean, if I do, great, but I'm not going to push myself to try and talk for longer than 10 to 12 minutes max, just because my voice cannot handle that much talking. Think of these as speed paints essentially, since I want to show the process and progress. Maybe I'll tell stories about my friends and family if they're okay with that. Not that they watch my videos anyway, so I can embarrass them all I want. Ha ha ha. No, I'll make sure I'm at least a little nice, don't worry. So today I'm starting with my mother's gift. Honestly, she's saved up enough of my art over the years that she could dedicate an entire museum to me. She has always been really supportive of my art, to the point where I had mentioned thinking about applying to an art school for college, and she had said that if anyone could do it, I could. She's also the type of parent to insist their child could have gotten into Harvard and been top of the class, so at least she's enthusiastic? Still, it was nice of her to say, though I don't think I would have survived art school at all if I'm being honest. I debated painting a moose since that's her favorite animal, but I've technically done that for her back in high school? Granted, I could probably paint a better one now, but I wanted to offer a little more variety, so a horse. My mom used to own horses, be in equestrian shows, she taught all her children how to ride horses. When she worked at this horse barn, we would go with her and hang out while she tended to each of the boarding horses. Like, my mom's a horse girl. Unfortunately, none of her 3 daughters became horse girls, but I can't say that she didn't try. I think the closest to a horse girl that I got was when I used to draw horses all the time. They were pretty much the only thing I drew up until I was like 12, so that being said, it's been a couple years. But the way I drew them at first was like very rudimentary. I would draw the shapes that made up the horse, so like a lot of circles and rectangles. Then I would just connect them and draw trapezoids for the feet. I wouldn't erase the circles or guidelines at all, it was just boop, there, done. And I always drew them either standing straight up or in a very specific galloping pose, or maybe it was like a trot or canter, but I don't know my horse terminology. Anyway, point is, I understood the anatomy of a horse really well because that was basically how I was drawing it. Over time, I, refined the curves, erased the guidelines, and tried to make the poses a little more dynamic. Not very dynamic, but like a little. They were almost always side profile shots, but you know what? For an 8-ish-year-old without access to art tutorials or anything, I'd say that's pretty good. That being said, it's been a while. I did some sketches and studies the other day to brush up on whatever skills that hadn't dissipated by now, and I think I feel fairly confident about drawing the actual horse itself. Painting it, not so much. I did exclusively sketching when I was younger, so anything other than a pencil was basically new territory. I think actually that it's thanks to all this practice that I can draw horses more easily, though I'm willing to bet my problems with drawing humans over animals is that I have to think about clothing, which is dumb. I would just draw artistic nudity all the time, but I feel like I couldn't get away with that on YouTube. I mean, maybe I could for a little while, but I should practice clothing so that I can get better at it. But not today. I did a practice painting of a horse in my little watercolor journal to try and understand the color dynamics of the horse body, but I wasn't too impressed with myself. It looked bad. No, I'm not showing it. So I tried another one on a 6x9 piece of watercolor paper. Still wasn't impressed, and still not showing it. So I did this one that you're seeing now as a third practice piece to experiment with techniques and color. I ended up actually really liking how this one turned out though, so it became the final piece. I started trying to do a wet on wet wash first with my two Daniel Smith colors, but the pans I put them into were tiny compared to the size 12 brush I was using, and the color wasn't blooming as much as I wanted it to. I'm sure that's due to a combination of not having enough pigment on the brush and not having fantastic watercolor paper. I'm using the Canson XL watercolor paper, so I mean, it's not terrible, it's not bad, but it definitely was buckling through the wash. I was worried it wouldn't be able to handle more layers, but I was able to make it work in the end, somehow. Once that wash was dry, I went in with a brown Col-Erase pencil and vaguely sketched out the lines of the horse. I just wanted to get the angle of the head right and note where the shadows were. The rest I felt confident enough to pull off. It was a little anxiety-inducing though, because the Col-Erase was pretty much set in stone wherever I'd sketched, and I started with the ear a little too low, so I had to just sort of erase tiny bits of it at a time so as not to destroy the paper, and just kind of hope for the best. The good thing about these Col-Erase pencils is that they're light, and with enough water they do dilute and mix in with the watercolors, so the brown was a good choice. And I totally planned that and didn't just grab a random pencil from the box. Totally. I mentioned earlier that this was a fairly large paper size. I don't normally work with anything larger than like 8x10, and even then I don't like using 8x10. I was far more comfortable working with the 6x9, but I also have a tendency towards trying to go in more detail than I have to, so this was definitely something out of my comfort zone. Watercolors are all about letting go of control, and that's exactly what I hate doing. But I'm glad I did it, and I like working with a larger brush too. It feels nice. It's a Princeton Neptune brush, by the way. I bought it separately, which I don't recommend if you do not have the funds. I did it because 1, I'm impulsive, and 2, it was back when I was actually making money and could afford to do this. I'm not making money now, so I'm glad I invested in nicer tools when I was able to. The horse itself, I think I used my Prima Watercolors complexion set, though I know I used some from my Van Gogh set. And again, these were bought when I was actually making money. The way I did this was by starting with the light brown wash, building up very minimal shadow on the next pass. Then I immediately shifted to a blue hue and went in on the darkest shadows. I know this is not how you're supposed to do watercolor. You're supposed to build your way up to the darkest shadows, but in the moment, I was just painting wherever and whatever my hands decided to paint. So the blue went in all the deeper corners, like the ears, the hollow part of the cheek, the side of the eye, and the muzzle. Again, I did my best to keep it loose and not try too hard. I know I ended up overworking the side of the face just a little too much, but I think aside from that, I succeeded. As for the rest of the horse, I just did more muted, diluted colors of what I used on the face so that it was pushed into the background. I didn't want to put too much thought into where the shadows went because, again, don't want detail, it's pushed into the background, doesn't matter as much. Then the black I used for the mane was a mix of Payne's Gray from Van Gogh and charcoal from my Prima Vintage Pastel set, which I think is weird that they included such a pigmented black in a pastel set, but whatever. It's a really nice black. I don't ordinarily use black in my paintings, but mixed with the Payne's Gray here, I think it works. The Payne's Gray is like a dark bluish gray, which I think works well with the blue shadows of the face. Again, something I totally planned out. In the end, which you'll see soon, I ended up taking gold and silver paint markers to add accents. I used the gold marker to outline the face, and then I added some silver to the mane. I think that's where I messed up though. A little too much silver in the mane. I fixed it the best I could, but I think in the end I just have to make peace with it. If I had thought this was going to be the final piece, I would have worked in a few more layers to make the horse look more realistic, but I think I'm glad that I stopped where I did. I didn't want to fall into the abyss of adding a lot of detail. I would have been sitting there for hours. As it was, the piece took about 2.5 hours. So yeah, editing will be a nightmare, and I think you can see why I said I don't want to be talking for the whole time. That being said, I had a lot of fun with this piece, and I'm glad I took the chance to work on something larger. I hope my mom likes it. I'll come back at the end of the video for an outro, but until then, enjoy the rest of the time lapse. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching it. If you enjoyed it, remember to like the video and leave a comment letting me know what you think about this setup. I'll be using it for a little while as a sort of experiment, so some feedback would be great. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!